very worthwhile, and we hope useful. Here we go. From Peter K. In my observation over the past decades, I've noticed that many non-premium property markets can nosedive after an event, for example, the 2008 global financial crisis. I've also observed that the said property market experiences a delayed hysterical effect, and thus I've seen property prices continue to decline for approximately 2 years before recovering and commencing to resume the price climb once more. I'm of the opinion this time is again upon us, and the event on this occasion is the COVID pandemic. So although I'm thinking of buying investment property, experience tells me to wait for at least 12 to 18 months more. Your thoughts on this, please. Do you feel the time is good now, or would it be best to wait for the hysterical effect to avoid possible likely near-term decline of property values and thus get in somewhere near the bottom of the curve, not exactly at the bottom, which is nearly impossible to pinpoint?
So, yeah, if I could have the full
Right,
page
there you
just
go. Lengthy question.
to refer back to, but right, the 2008 global financial crisis was a different animal than COVID, and the COVID's going to affect different markets. It's already affecting office and commercial markets, some rental markets in the U.S., for example. But in the case of the global financial crisis, markets like Spain dropped as high as 70% in some regions. Portugal didn't hit bottom until really 2014, 2015, which is when we bought property there. And so it's going to be market to market. What is really going to take the biggest hit from what we look at is short-term rental markets, because if you can't travel, there's no tourism, there's no short-term rental market. So those would be the places to wait a while until more of the owners there are feeling the heat too, because they're not having the revenue but having expenses.
They'll likely take the biggest hit and also be the slowest to recover.
Right. But we're looking at each market as best we can remotely. Our contacts in Portugal, for example, think that it won't be till March that you start seeing real softening of the market, because that's when the moratorium on rent and mortgage payments ends, and at that point people need to make a decision. If they don't have the money to make the mortgage payments, they have to sell or turn the property back over to the bank. So it's going to depend market by market. It's not going to be quite as linear as the 2008 crisis. And then there are markets that are going to probably just be fine. The Paris market, for example, was really strong before COVID, and I'm sure it's softened a little bit just from fewer transactions right now. But
well, there was a window over the summer when we were in Paris, in fact, as the quarantines were being lifted in June, where the property market just rebounded dramatically because it had been forced into dormancy for those few months of the quarantine. But then as soon as the restrictions were lifted and people were able to go out again to shop, and there will always be buyers in Paris, I guess is the point. And as soon as they were able to be out shopping again, the market rebounded almost instantly.
Right. And so the markets you're talking about that had delayed hysterical effect or a large effect because of the global financial crisis, and again, doing Spain, it was overbuilt markets to begin with. It was markets that it was foreigner driven, both by investors, but also by the rental market, the people who rent there. And so the thing to look for is, when you're buying a property that isn't going to fall because of those markets disappearing. So you want to buy a property that has some intrinsic value at a minimum, which are going to be the first to recover from something like this. So, beachfront properties, for example, when the tourists come back, if everybody has low prices, people are going to go for the best property that they can afford, and that would be a beachfront property.
Right. So brand name cities, brand name markets like Paris, or beachfront. Beachfront will always find a market. Okay. All right. Teresa M. asks, thanks for your recent article on Portugal. I had a scouting trip to Portugal planned for earlier this year that was derailed by the pandemic. As soon as the opportunity arises, though, I'm going. I'm interested in the northern part of Portugal, not the Algarve. Can you recommend what I should be doing now while I'm waiting to be able to take my trip? Thank you so much in advance for any recommendations.
So you're right. Do as much research as you can. You look online for properties to pay attention to what is happening with the market in the areas that you're interested in. I would say get Duolingo on your
oh, that's a great tip.
On your computer.
Learn a little Portuguese
and pick up on some Portuguese if you're sure that that's the place that you want to spend more time in, so you have at least the basics down of, abogado and other niceties when you arrive there, and try and speak to some agents remotely to get their take on what's happening, and again, the specific markets that you're looking at. We pay attention to the Algarve and Lisbon mostly, but our contacts do
Porto, Cascais, and elsewhere
Porto
in the
and
north.
part of the north.
Yeah. So I will make another very practical recommendation, which is during this period of pause, wherever we're thinking beyond Teresa, who's looking specifically at Portugal, but wherever you're looking or considering, take this moment of pause to do your research. And I would say that one of the best opportunities for that is our Retire Overseas conference taking place next week,
right,
where we're going to be bringing together dozens and dozens of experts who are on the ground in these markets. Maybe you and we can't get on a plane right now to go to Portugal or Thailand or Brazil or Mexico or where have you, but we have contacts who are on the ground there, who are in those places, and who can report to us from the scene about what the situation is. Everyone's wondering, of course, what's the current situation in this time of the pandemic with restrictions and quarantines and all of that, and what's going on with the property market as a result of the pandemic quarantines and restrictions. And so we'll have all of these contacts together next week online over 4 days, looking at 21 countries in particular. And I think there's a special opportunity for listeners of this webinar.
There should be a URL at the end of the presentation here, whatever we're calling this, the live YouTube thing. And
you can see we're very savvy about all of this technology.
And so you'll want to use a discount code ROVC100, and you can get a discount on the Retire Overseas conference, which starts next week, actually.
All right, Dennis N. I really enjoy your articles. I have a question about real estate investing overseas. I live in the U.S. currently, which I don't like, and I was thinking of investing here, but I don't have any experience with international real estate investing. I have $100,000 in liquid assets saved. Are overseas investments better for cash flow than the U.S.? Do you have any suggestions for where to start or look since you have so much experience? Thank you.
Right. So are there better cash flow deals outside of the U.S. than inside the U.S.? Yes and no. I mean, you can find good cash flow deals inside the U.S. I'd stay away from any triple net lease commercial deals right now until you see how COVID affects retail and office spaces. With the $100,000, the issue overseas is financing is not easily available, so you have to have cash in most markets. But with the $100,000, you could buy a condo or a tiny home in Belize, for example. You can't quite find probably much for $100,000, especially since the euro has strengthened in the last couple of months. In Portugal, as you used to a few years ago, but Italy, you can find something. And so it depends on really what your goals are, of course, from an investment perspective and a lifestyle perspective. If you want to buy, a small apartment in Medellin that you can rent out, but then use yourself, that's a possibility. And there are some markets where you can get financing, like Panama and Dominican Republic. Portugal, in fact, the local banks will lend to foreigners as well, and other countries in Europe. So there are some options there.
In the past, you've recommended a strategy, which is the strategy you used to get started, which was you made an investment in the United States that paid off in a very nice way, in a big way, and gave you a nice seed, some nice capital to take overseas and begin diversifying into foreign markets. Would you still recommend that, which I think might speak to what this reader's wondering about? Would it make sense to start with an investment in the United States still right now, or would you recommend just looking globally?
Again, it depends on how much capital you have. I started out with $5,000 and used that with a high loan-to-value mortgage to buy a 3-flat building in Chicago. And 2.5 years later, thanks to the appreciation of the apartment, I sold it and made $150,000. And so you can't do that every time. If I could, we probably wouldn't be sitting here right now talking about this. I'd be on a yacht somewhere. But the U.S. is great for using other people's money and to build that nest egg. But leverage has
pros and cons.
Two sides to it. I know a lot of people who have used the other people's money programs. I say Carleton Sheets, which dates me, but there are other U.S. real estate guys, and it's If you have 20 properties and they're all leveraged, but all of a sudden you have no renters, have no people who've lost their entire portfolio because of a market turn. And in COVID right now, I think there's a lot of people in those situations that are going to have issues, and maybe you can find something, a good deal in the U.S. depending on what market you're looking at, and get leverage, especially at the low rates in the U.S. So it depends on what your end game is, what your risk tolerance is,
right?
And again, diversification. If you've got $100,000, maybe you buy something with leverage in the U.S. and you buy something smaller or an agricultural opportunity overseas to get started.
That's a good point. $100,000 is enough to do 2 deals, to make 2 investments.
2 small ones, yeah.
2 small ones. And so, right, it depends on your end game. If you're looking purely for investment, purely to expand that $100,000 into some multiple of that, well, then what Leif is describing, you get leverage in the U.S., get financing in the U.S., and then take something offshore as well. Split it.
Right.
But if you're
just to clarify, the way you were saying that, you can't get leverage in the U.S. to buy offshore.
I didn't. Yeah, sorry. I meant to make a purchase in the United States. Sorry, and a second purchase in another market.
Right.
But if your end game is as well, or really primarily lifestyle, then maybe you take the $100,000 and you look for the little beach house or pied-à-terre of your dreams, and that should be the priority agenda. All right. Larry G is wondering. You need to, or no, he's not wondering. He's correcting us. He's setting us straight.
Trying to.
You need to redo your figures on the income requirements for Mexico residency. The consulate in Tucson says you need $1,650 per month or $45,000 a year in savings.
And
we published a different.
It was I think it was $1,300 a month and $21,000 in savings
that we published recently.
But the issue with Mexico is that each of the consulates can make up their own numbers. They're trying to standardize that at this point, from our understanding. But whichever consulate you go to apply for your residency, they're the ones that are going to tell you what figures you need to meet. And so currently, yes, it seems Tucson is now asking for $1,650 per month. I'd be interested for this person to go back next week and speak to someone else in the consulate and see what they say. It might get a different answer.
It makes a really important point, because this immigration stuff, the residency requirements and stipulations, not only do they change, as has happened in Mexico this year, there have been changes, but as well, they are sometimes, depending on the country and the program, open to interpretation, as Leif is suggesting.
Right.
So what's published on the website is the theory sometimes. The reality is the conversation between you and the person on the other side of the immigration desk.
Right. And if this guy went into the Tucson consulate of Mexico wearing a suit and $500 shoes, then the consular officer may think, okay, he's got money, so we're going to tell him it's $1,600. Portugal is another example of where it's up to the person in the office that you go into.
Discretion.
There's discretion. In theory, it's 1 or 2 times the monthly minimum wage in Portugal, which is less than 1,000 euros, but our attorney there hasn't had anybody ever be told less than 1,200 euros. So it's a moving target, and you just want to make sure that you have enough flexibility in whatever your number is, that you're not just sneaking in with the
down to the dollar.
Yeah.
And also, it makes a point that, or it reminds us of a point we try to make often, which is when you have an idea that you want to move somewhere, and you identify a residency program that works for you, act on it. Go ahead and pull the trigger, follow through, start the process, get your residency, because the requirements change.
Yeah.
Emilio P. writes to say, glad to hear you are updating your Plan B kit. That's the residency kit, which Leif just spent the past several weeks updating in great detail. This would be great time to inform us of the countries that require yearly stays to grant or maintain residency, just like you did recently with the background check article, so we can make a more informed decision. I have never seen a list of countries that do not require the in-country stay, if there are any. I have seen where you mention the time required by some countries. Bottom line, are there any countries that do not require yearly time spent in the country to get or keep a residency visa?
Yeah, the only one with 0 requirement on an annual or biannual basis that I can think of is Dominican Republic. But it depends on what residency permit you get for the country. Most countries have more than one option. The cleanest comparison is Portugal, where if you go under the Golden Visa program, which requires a large investment in real estate, 280,000 to 500,000 euros in real estate, you have to spend what amounts to a week a year during the first 5 years until you get permanent residency or apply for naturalization. If you go under the person of means and prove this 1,200 euros of income that we just talked about, you have to spend 183 days or more in the country. So same country, 2 different permits, 2 different time requirements.
And very different practical implications.
And so if you're looking for a plan B, just a backup place where you have legal residency, where when the next pandemic happens, the country has to let you in because you're a resident. And even under the COVID pandemic, a lot of countries locked out not only legal residents, but citizens
in some cases,
for short periods of time anyway, including Colombia and Panama. But so you want to see where you want to be. You don't want to just have a plan B residency in, say, Paraguay, for example, which has fairly simple residency rules. But if it's a place you can't get to or a place you don't want to spend time, then it doesn't make sense for a plan B. And then how much time do you need to spend? It can be as little as once every 2 years for some of the permanent residency programs in Colombia and Panama. And so you really need to go through the kit to look at every option there is and what fits into your plans.
Right. Okay, Liz D. writes to say, I am interested in moving overseas, but I'm wondering about closed borders. Right now, I couldn't pick up and move to most places I'm looking at, even if I had the means. While we can expect borders to open eventually, the U.S. response to COVID and the possibility of a political wildfire going out of control in November makes me question if all of this is so much wishful thinking. Those with vast wealth are cushioned against such concerns, but I am not, and maybe many of your other readers are of middling, modest means also.
Right. And we know people who are, following through on their residency applications now. Our residency attorneys in Portugal are busy. Again, it depends on what kind of residency permit. So, right, the Golden Visa people who are investing €250,000 or more certainly have the means and the ability to hire attorneys for this. But Mexico is accepting applications. Mexico is open. You can fly to Mexico. You can still drive to Mexico, although that seems to change depending on the day. Our colleague Lee Harrison, who'll be joining us for the Retire Overseas conference next week, pays attention to that because Mexico is his latest residency location. And so you can still, again, depending on the country, be working on your residency application and gathering all the documents now to be ready for when the borders do open, and then you can make your move.
And I think maybe to address the final point, which is, no, it isn't only people, jet setters and people with massive wealth who can be acting on this even under the current circumstances.
Right.
The options at all budget levels remain available now. What's going on in the world hasn't changed that. What's going on in the world has forced us all to pause and to, stop moving forward physically with our plans. We can't be moving around the world, but we can still be moving forward from a research perspective, as we've been saying, and a processing and planning, preparedness perspective.
Right.
And that is true for anyone of any means looking for any budget level of lifestyle anywhere in the world. So please don't think that because you don't have a huge budget that your options have been reduced in any way. They haven't, that I could imagine.
Right, and right. It's just a matter of timing. But again, take this time to get your paperwork together. Contact an attorney in the country that you're interested in. If the question is you're not sure where to go, then that's a different question. You need to make that decision. Again, that's why we're doing our virtual Retire Overseas event this year, since we can't do it in person, to help people make the decision on where. But if you do know where, contact an attorney, contact a local consulate. Some countries, it's fairly easy to do your residency on your own. Mexico and Colombia are 2 examples. Other countries like Panama really require an attorney because an attorney has to sign off on certain documents anyway, and no attorney is going to sign off on those documents unless you hire them to do the whole process. And some are just more complicated, and the language is more complicated, like Portugal, where we recommend you use an attorney. And get your paperwork together, and you can start the application process from abroad. And in fact, in some cases, like Portugal, you have to get a visa to enter the country to be able to apply for residency. You don't have to get a visa to enter as a tourist, but if you're going to apply for residency, you have
A
to
visa
get
in your country where you're coming from is the critical
point. You have to
point.
get a visa stamped in your passport from the Portugal consulate saying, I'm going to Portugal to establish residency. And so that has to be done in advance as well. So you don't want to just hop on a plane to go to Portugal and think you're going to start your residency process there.
Anyway, because if you do and you don't have this special stamp before you enter the country, you'll have to leave the country, get the stamp,
and
go back.
Right.
Okay, Judith S. And that's true for other countries as well. Portugal isn't the only one.
For most of Europe, it's true, yeah.
Which is an important starting point if Europe is in your plan. Judith S. writes, you state that the golden visa in Greece gives you access to countries in the Schengen zone. Does that mean you can also live anywhere else in the zone?
So technically, no, is the answer. Not that people don't do that. But if you have an EU passport, and so in the Schengen zone, the countries are slightly different and people get confused. So let's just talk about EU. If you have an EU passport, so say a Greek passport, you're allowed to spend up to 90 days in most of the other EU countries, if not all. I haven't checked them all. At a time. With the Schengen zone, if you don't have an EU or Schengen passport, you're only allowed 90 days in a rolling 180-day period. So you could be in the zone 90 days and then out of the zone 90 days and then in the zone 90 days. With the Greek residency, that doesn't apply anymore. And as a Greek resident, you can spend 90 days in Portugal, 90 days in Italy in a row, consecutive days, 90 days in France, and 90 days in Germany. You wouldn't have to spend any time.
Are you following all of this?
Exactly. You wouldn't have to spend any time in Greece except for the minimum requirements for the golden visa. And I think in just updating this, Greece has 0 time requirements, where Portugal has 1 week requirement for this golden visa. So in other words, you can spend a lot more time and don't have to leave the Schengen zone if you have the Greek residency, but you can't technically decide to move full-time permanently into another Schengen zone country just because you have the Greek residency.
And this gets complicated, the Schengen rules. And I think there's a tool online and where you can go to.
If you're traveling if you don't have residency in the Schengen zone or the EU, yes, there is a tool at one of the Schengen websites that can tell you how much time you can still spend in the zone by putting in dates. So if you're not a simple 30 days in, 30 days out, which goes back and forth and over 180 days, that works out. But if you're, say, 4 months in and 2 months out, how many more days can you spend? Well, you can't because you're already over. Go use the tool.
And I'm sorry, I don't know the URL, but if you Google Schengen rules.
Schengen time and country calculator or something like that, you should be able to find it.
Okay, we're going to take one more question.
Well, we have some actually from people online as well.
Wonderful. Okay, great. So let's take this one and then we'll move on to the live questions. George M. writes, where can I find a form or checklist that I can use to check my interests and desires and needs to help me find the best place for me?
Well, that's really for you to answer. The Retire Overseas conference that goes on next week. We also have another publication, a course called the 52 Days course. That's an internal name. There's a more formal title for it.
Retire Overseas in 52 Days.
Right.
So we do produce a number of checklists. In fact, if you Google on our website, go to liveandinvestoverseas.com, you'll find some checklists there. Then, as Leif suggests, we do a course, How to Retire Overseas in 52 Days, that includes lots of checklists, day by day, category by category, from residency and taxes, banking, healthcare, et cetera, walks you through really step by step. In addition, there's my book, How to Retire Overseas, which you can buy on Amazon, and that includes a lot of checklists, again, from all the different aspects of making a move like this. And then the best opportunity right now really would be to join us next week. We're going to have a lot of fun doing things like reviewing checklists for making a plan for moving to another country, while also doing what is probably more fun, looking at the best options to move overseas right now, the 21 countries we've identified as most appealing. And again, as a listener of this live podcast, you have an opportunity, I think, to save something on the registration.
Right.
There's a coupon code.
The coupon code is ROVC100. And so if you put that in when you register for the event, you'll get the discount, which I think the 100 means $100 off. So,
all right. Can you read these questions?
I can. So our staff has sent some questions from people online. First one is, can I easily buy and build on my own in Belize? And the answer is, generally speaking, yes. The good thing is in Belize, they speak English, plenty of real estate agents, lots of developments that you can buy a lot and build in as well. And there are no foreign owner restrictions in Belize. The building part is going to be harder. Finding a good builder anywhere is difficult.
I was going to say, my answer to that is you can't easily buy and build anywhere in the world. So it's a great idea. It's something we've done and would do again, but you need to be up for it. It's not something to be undertaken lightly or without really thinking it through. And my main tip for building or renovating a house in another country, or in fact in the United States. We're renovating the house where we're staying right now in Northern Illinois.
Doing some work, yeah.
Doing some work, and we're finding it works the same way here as it does in the dozen or so countries around the world where we have built and renovated houses. Number one, it costs more than you imagine it could, or than it's represented that it will, according to the bids. Number two, it takes longer than you imagine it could, or than it's represented that it will by the contractors. So the important point, I believe, is make sure you have not only the budget, not only for what is quoted, but something beyond that, because it will cost more than is being quoted.
Well, and we've seen a lot of people move, especially to Central America over the years, and start to build a house and run out of money.
Right.
Because they were told one thing, or because they didn't really think it through. And so you don't want to run out of money and be living in a house that isn't quite finished, which again we can point you to a lot of people over the years that we've seen that oh, well, why does your kitchen have no cabinets? We ran out of money.
That's a real example. And so if the house is quoted to cost $100,000, you need a budget of $125,000. I think you need a reasonable overage.
You need some buffer, or you need to buy in a development that is giving you a fixed cost price, and they're gonna turn the house over to you completed.
Right, more turnkey situation.
Right. We have one other from online. I know you can't address every country, but we are wanting to retire in northern Portugal, but we'd like to know a bit about Germany, the Netherlands, and other countries in Europe periodically. Right. In our editorial, we covered the countries we do because they make sense for multiple reasons for retirement: ease of residency, good weather, low cost of living. Germany, not ease of residency, not great weather, and maybe you can find low cost of living outside of the cities, but it's not.
And we don't focus on Northern Europe in general because of the weather.
Right. The Northern Europeans are going to Italy, France, Spain, and Portugal as well.
But that's not to say those aren't interesting places, and it might not be the place for you. But
right, to visit.
Yeah.
One place that is inexpensive in Northern Europe and could be interesting is Poland. That's some place that we talk about a little bit, but not a lot. And the other inexpensive places that might make sense could be Romania and Bulgaria, and they do have the Black Sea coast there. But and Bulgaria does have a citizenship by investment program, so you could get residency there fairly easily. But from a lifestyle and living perspective, we focus on as many countries as we can, but the ones that make sense from an actual retirement perspective.
And weather is an important factor for retirees.
Yeah. Weather and cost of living and healthcare are probably the top three. For the person who asked the list, you have to decide, which, if any of those, you're willing to give up. If cost of living isn't an issue and you like the German culture, then Germany can make a lot of sense. Yeah.
Do we have another one?
No, I think that was just those two from people out live. So thank you for those questions.
All right. If anyone has a last-minute question, we will take it if it appears in the next second or so. Meantime, thank you all for joining us very much. Thank you for listening to our first ever live Live and Invest Overseas podcast. Leif and I will be back again next week with our regular weekly program, and we will be planning another live event, so stay tuned for that. Meantime, thank you. Keep reading.
Bye, everyone.